You know, so, and I think that because I'm very passionate about what I do, I think that's the most racist institutional statement that can be said about us. Because the apple that falls from the tree, whose apple are you talking about? Okay? African American families, we are good and we know what we're doing. So I want to talk about foster care is a temporary solution to ensure a child's safety and well-being. It's only temporary. And what legacy are we creating when we let our children grow up in the foster care system? Sometimes this arrangement can be for a child's lifetime. And when a child grows up in foster care, that causes a separation, anxiety experience. And we all know whether we've been married, whether we had our first relationship, when someone pulls us away from that, we get all this anxiety, we get all nervous. And when we take children and put them in foster care into a place that they are unfamiliar, you can imagine what happens to them. So foster care happens when a child is removed from a birth parent or from a primary caregiver for abuse, neglect, abandonment. So that's basically, that's what foster care is about. I have been a social worker for over 20 years. I've been on both sides. I've been the social worker that went to the home and said that your children shouldn't be here. I've been on the side that went to the home and said your children should be here. I'm on the side now that evaluate families that say you should be a foster parent. I'm also on the side that says to evaluate you whether or not you should be an adopted family. But what I have found out in all of my experience is that one of the things is that in foster care, the legacy that's created in foster care is something that we should be thinking about. African American children are overrepresented in the foster care system.
Yes.
They represent 24% of the children in foster care. 5.8% of the children in California are African American. That's a high overrepresentation. 5.8% is how many children? That's the percent of the African American children in California. But when we talk about foster care, it's 24%. There are over 12,000 children, African American children in California foster care system. And because there's over 12,000, there's enough of us that can take one child and make sure that child is not in the foster care system. Single African American mothers are at high risk of having their children being removed from their care because of the high stress factors and the responsibilities related to raising their children with limited resources and support. We have to support our single African American mothers. Yes, we have single African American fathers, but usually the social worker is not going to take those children from him. They will take them from us, from the single mothers. The re-entry rate for foster care for African American children is higher than any other racial group. They return within 12 to 24 months. And that group is infants, preteens, and teenagers. Some of the risk factors that causes our children to re-enter into the foster care system is that the child's behavior is out of control due to the anger from being initially placed in foster care. So you remove me from my home, and then you tell me I can go back home. And you do not provide any services for my family. So the child is angry. So we know what happens when we're angry. Those things happen, and it's not appropriate, and those children return back into the foster care system. The age and gender. African American boys return back to the foster care system at a high rate. Infants return back at a high rate. Mental health issues, learning issues. Some of the other things that happen is unmet needs of family, grief, the social environment. When children go into foster care and they return back to their family, those families need resources to continue to maintain their children in their home. Depending on what's going on with the family, if the family is a unit, the child does very well when they return home. But if the family is not a unit, what happens when we talk about the unit for our families? The unit is how we can gather around. If I'm unable to have my cousin with me, maybe my sister can. maybe my grandmother, maybe the mother at the church who's has been perceived as a relative can take the child in. So we need to think about that. I want to try to give you a historical review of the foster care regarding African Americans. It was not until the mid-20th century when African American children was included in the public child welfare system. When the public child welfare system started, they excluded African Americans. Wow. Foster care began in 1853 with the orphan train movement in New York. And by 1911, Illinois was the first state to mandate that a mother could receive cash assistance, and they were called deserving mothers. You can read between the line on that, deserving mothers. The impact of foster care, if we look at it, is that research from all across the country states that children in foster care who are placed with their relatives are just as safe or safer when compared with placement with non-relatives. So that debunks the apple falling from the tree, right? In 2008, the Foster Connection Act became a law that required that relatives be notified within 30 days that they had a relative in the foster care system, and that reasonable effort be made to keep siblings together. Now, the definition of relative changes. In California, the definition we use here is an adult who is related to the child by blood, adoption, or anyone within the 5th degree. And sometimes we talk about non-related extended family members. Non-related extended family members mean those folks that are not blood connected, but you always thought that was uncle. You always thought that was cousin. You know the mother at the church was always everybody's mother. So you are a relative too. So when a child goes into foster care, always remember you're a relative also. Now what they would tell you is preferential treatment. Preferential treatment always goes to grandmothers, aunts, and uncles. But if little Joe been calling you aunt, are you his aunt? Yes, you are. That's our culture. So the benefits of relative placement in foster care has a positive impact on our children. When we have relatives, when our children go into relatives' home, our children are less likely to re-enter the foster care system. Our children are most likely to live with their siblings, have less trauma. That's if they can get there. That's the piece, if they can get there. So what I would like to say today is we must return to our cultural legacy and recapture the spirit and practice of our grandparents who said there was a moral courage providing a family, an extended family, with a safety net and a system of care for children. Without our commitment to our children, they are at great risk of becoming a forgotten generation. And how? Growing up in the foster care system is a cultural genocide. So I encourage all of you, when you hear the word foster care, instead of saying those children, say our children.
Thank you so much, Cora. One thing I was listening to you, and you said 58% African children here. It is 50%. 50% of them are African American.
24%.
24%. Now, I thought you said 24 in the foster care.
Oh, I was talking about foster care.
Okay, yeah. So 24% are in foster care. African Americans, 24%. Are you all listening to this? Are you listening to what she's saying? And I say this because I had a goddaughter. But you mean me trying to be a pastor, and I said, okay, I'm not an aunt, I'm a godmother. That don't fly. I couldn't get insurance for my goddaughter because I was not a relative. And you just said it. I'm keeping her. She's staying in my house. Guess what? I'm a relative.
That's right.
And we have to know the right things to say. And it's not that we're lying, but you have to know the right thing to call yourself.
Right.
Because if not, you're not going to get any help.
Right.
So I open the floor. If there are any questions of someone, please, now is the time. Yes.
When you're dealing with my daughter from Atlanta and my daughter, we see a lot of people going into business on those follow babies. Who is going to do the counseling? If they take on those babies in those, that the state are taking over. Who gonna keep their eye on those babies? They're gonna pay good money. Now, this is a business gonna pay some good money. But who going to be responsible for keeping an eye on those babies and telling those babies who they are? Now, some things happened to my auntie's kids, with 16 of them in Salisbury, North Carolina. They was in the orphan home, and they grew up and they didn't know their sister brothers. So somebody gonna have to get into that and say, look, if you're gonna adopt those babies, or you're gonna take those babies in that the state has taken from somebody, try to find out something about the baby, the people that had those babies, their bloodline.
Absolutely.
You follow the woman, don't follow the man, don't carry no bloodline. The woman carried the bloodline. Where was that woman's name before she got married? You may be able to touch base with somebody, come in and say, look, that's our blood, we take that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for the comment. In the back there.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I was raised in an environment where we don't give up on our children. They have issues, you know, we have family members that have issues, but our kids stay with us, no matter what condition they're in. And I think that that's a generation, it might be a regional thing. I mean, I was raised in Ohio, so we have that strong southern thing going on. And so we just move them around, and I'm an elder and I'm just on guard for which one's got to move with me or whatever I got to do. But my question is, why do they why do they take the children from the female as opposed to the male? I think you said most of all it's a single man. What's going on with that?
You know, it has a lot of reasons behind it, but one of the reasons what happens to African American females is because we're very vulnerable in the environments that we're living in, and as an absent male. And so when Child Protective Service enter into your home, you're usually at a low spot. You're usually there. And statistic tells us that African American mothers, not just African American mothers, mothers in general, are high abusers of their children because when they get frustrated,
And we're there.
right, and then it becomes overwhelming, okay? So that's one of the complex that happens. With men, because they don't respond emotional like we do, so you don't see a high abuse among men and their children where you see a high abuse among women and their children. And that's something that we don't like to talk about, but it's there.
Yes, it is. Yes.
We moved here in 1971, and that's when I realized that it was a different culture because my dad was in the Air Force. California had its own culture. There were a lot of women who dropped out of school and got on welfare and had children. And those children had children before. I mean, they're great-great-grands right now. I'm not a grandmother. My son is 28 years old. And I find that, you know, that willful defiance that allowed the state to come in and support women, young women, also destroyed them because their children had children early and those children had children early. And the behaviors are out of control. But there's no additional opportunities to learn after high school. High school is what you get. You don't get anything else. So there are no parenting workshops that are established in Sacramento for African Americans to help other African American females understand what their responsibilities and roles are as a parent. There's just nothing. Our churches really don't get into it. It's a personal issue, but it should be a God issue, and it's not. We have so many children, and the money that is generated by the foster care system in Sacramento. If you're non-relative, you could get up to $1,700 for a jug baby, I'm understanding, in some cases. And so what we don't understand is that these people are buying homes in wealthier neighborhoods with the little black pickaninny children running 2 or 3 that are paying their mortgages. And when they get 18, they're gone. So, you know, but it's a community responsibility to gather and have this. This is the first conversation that I've ever been to in a room where we're really talking about issues that have affected us over a time frame. This is a time frame of 30 years or more. And no one has ever stepped up to come together. Yeah, we have a little meeting and they come and they want to provide services to you. I don't need anybody providing services to me. I need to be taught how to provide my own services. My mother always made us stick together as women and males in our family. So we are a family unit. But most people are not family units. And so therefore, those children got left early, and those children got left early, and they are out there with no guidance, no support. They're just out there, and it's frightening.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
There's a lot I wanted to say. I really appreciate Cora's comment and all of us being here. And I wanted to say this is a large issue in our community. And when we look at the high number of black children in the system, what I figure is that that number represents that amount of money coming in the state from federal dollars. So if you look at it, if you keep kids in the system, then that's guaranteed amount of money coming into the state for one. The other thing is, black women have always been the backbone of our community. However, we haven't had the support that we needed from the system, and frankly, a lot of times, on a larger scale, we haven't supported each other the way that we needed to. Okay? So with everything that's happening now in our communities, with our children, and with the information now being more, there's being more dialogue about our children in the foster care system, and they're being cattle like a business for some people. We need to do something about it because the system is not. But that's only going to happen if we begin to make room in our homes for our own children in our community and understand that we are a village. We talk about that village model, but we really need to become that, not just for our children, but for the survival of our own communities.
Absolutely.
Because if
Yes.
we wait for other people to do it, you know what? It ain't going to happen. Just look around what's happening now. It's not going to happen.
They're
Okay?
doing it.
Yes,
So-
yes.
And I just want to say, I love the fact that we have this conference today. But in my opinion, this building should be full.
Right.
And what that says to me is that there's a disconnect. We know sometimes families just don't get here, but we know there's a lot of reasons why they don't make it. But I think that we need to have more of a connection, I can say this, with our churches, because we could use our churches and work more closely with them to help get families to conferences like that. Because this is where it's going to start. If you're not here to get the information, then you're going to feel isolated, okay? You're not going to get the information that you need. But, you know, we need to make room in our homes for our children in our community. We really do.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. I just wanted to say, and I'm going to give the lady here, because she was a foster person. So we talked earlier in the panel this morning about it starts at home. Some of us, we cook and we don't have any family time together. We cook, we go to our own spaces. But what about learning to sit at the table and talk? Because children have a voice and they need to be heard. But most of us don't take the time to listen to what they really have to say. So I want to let you, yes.
I had a kind of like a question and a comment. Like she said, I was a former foster. My experience was not great. I never stayed in one spot more than a year at the latest. I had actually very abusive foster homes, so I was one when I kept bouncing around and in group homes. I kind of ended up like a bad child eventually. Turned 18, I was kicked out, was homeless and stuff. So wasn't a very great experience. But something you had mentioned was that when they try to place a child, they try to first with a relative. And I was kind of wondering, because I'm trying to get my sister out of the situation that I was previously in since I was 2. And they won't place with me because they said that I'm not able to be her guardian because I was a former foster youth. And I didn't think that was correct because I figured, well, I know what she's going through. I've been through the system. It's not a great spot. I mean, for some, yes, there were some good parts, but for what she's going through, kids need to be placed with their families at all costs. I don't think they should be taken away and thrown to another state or into a random spot and not know what's going on. They should be at least, okay, I know this is my real sister, or I know this is my real uncle.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to keep her from that, but they told me that since I was a former foster youth, I couldn't take a child who's been in foster care, and she's been in and out of foster care, I couldn't take her since I was from a foster youth and she's a former foster youth. And I didn't think that was fair. So I was wondering, is there is something I can go around that, or something how I can fight that, to prevent her from going the route I went?
Well, I'm a social worker, so I don't know everything about it. However, I never heard of someone couldn't be a foster care because you was in the foster care system before, because that's an active recruitment that agencies use. If you was a former foster youth, you understand how a child was. If you had loss and you had grief. So I'm not quite sure. Now, the law passed in 2008, and it says that relatives must be notified. And you're her sister, and preferential treatment goes to grandparents, number one, siblings, number two, aunts and uncles. So maybe, I don't know what that is, but you can always file a grievance. You have that alternative, because that's what that was the whole purpose of the Foster Connection Act in 2008. And that act said that you had to notify relatives. Then it also included what they call family finding, meaning that if the child was in foster care in one state and a relative was in another state, that relative in the other state needed to be notified. So it's not just, it stops in one state. Not knowing exactly what that's all about, but you can file a grievance. That's the law. And sometimes you have to talk to people like that you know the law. It's the Foster Connection Act of 2008.
That's important to remember, and I'm gonna let missionary Judith.
What you need to do is Sacramento County has it's a treatment team when you were in foster care. What you need to do is, if you're a member of a church, if not, you need to find you a good church. And you have one of the members of the church who is a stable person in the community. I've done it for many foster kids. And line up, and you need to sit down and be able to articulate where you're going to live, where they're going to live, what resources you're going to have to help your sister. And then you take I've done it for others. You go in there with someone who is stable, who is going to support you. And that, I'm going to tell you where you're going to get that. You're going to get it in the church.
Right.
And they may not be able to take you in their home, but I've gone and personally with young women like you to that meeting and come out with that child going with you. So your sister will be with you. But first, you're going to have to get you a team of support around you. I'll be glad to talk to you afterwards, to take up time, but you can get your sister. But you got to understand how our systems operate.
Right.
And you got to get in the church to get you some support.
Absolutely.
You need support so that you can provide some support to your sister, because you're going to get her if you want her.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, missionary Judith. And I thank you because I have actually